First of all, before we start talking about Zabbix and cloud monitoring, it's a pleasure to see you all here, at least in the list of the participants, not in person yet. I may be wrong, but I think this is the first meetup this year. So it's great to see 140 plus people joining and want to talk and listen about Zabbix. So definitely stay tuned about everything that's gonna happen and go on with Zabbix this year. We have a lot of events and meetups and stuff ready for you. So quite a lot of content is coming up. So just stay tuned and participate in everything that you can. And getting back to the topic about the native cloud monitoring, maybe a surprise to someone, but my presentation is not actually like too technical. I'm not gonna go like step-by-step tutorial on how you can configure the cloud monitoring with Zabbix, and more talking about like the concept of what it is, how it works, and why it is actually good. And I think it's really like important to talk about the cloud monitoring because of one simple reason, despite the fact that it is quite a big, massive, and anticipated feature of the Zabbix, there's still a lot of people who think that it's not really possible to monitor cloud, any cloud vendors, maybe AWS, Azure, GCP, or whatever else, with Zabbix, no way. So actually, it is possible, and in this presentation, we'll try to figure out how you can do that. So first of all, before adding anything to your Zabbix, and before even starting the monitoring, it's very important to understand why are we even doing that. Pretty often people add everything that they can, not talking only about a cloud, any network devices, computers, servers, applications, databases, add absolutely all metrics without even keeping in mind, like, why do I need that? What will be the benefit for me, for our team, for the company, why that data is important. And in case of the cloud, it's, I think it's pretty straightforward. Of course, it depends also on some specific use cases and some services that we might be running in the company on which our cloud resources are actually relying. But on a high level, it's from these four, like I like probably two the most, which is cost optimization. Somehow, if we compare on-premise installations, which were more a thing in the past, and right now everything is getting more or less in the clouds. When something is on premise, like we always have somebody just walking around the actual physical servers, and if not looking at them daily, then at least keeping in mind that they are here, and okay, maybe I should check that everything is fine, and we see what is going on. With a cloud, however, especially when everybody start to scale and grow to hundreds, thousands, 10 of the thousands of servers, services, different databases and applications running in the cloud, which is not an issue, we might somehow like lose a track of what is actually going on. And I believe it's pretty frequent case whenever the simplest example, someone could have running virtual machines in their cloud provider for some dedicated tasks, paying quite a bunch of money for them for the allocated resources without even knowing that full year for the last like 3, 4, 5 years, our virtual machine is utilizing like 5% of allocated resources, and we're just overpaying everything because we don't even know that. So we don't track this data. We don't see the spots and directions where we could actually optimize it, and perhaps we don't need as many resources. Maybe we don't need 5 server load balancing setup on some applications. Maybe we need it only in some specific days, some holidays or whatever. So without the data, it's incredibly hard to actually understand what is going on and is it the case. And if we are collecting all this data, maybe Zabbix or in this case, whatever else, of course, it is much easier to first of all, get an insight of what is happening. And second thing, you can also always configure the triggers to get informed about some similar cases. And the second one, which I really like, is benchmarking, especially related to users and companies who are just like we, developing some sort of a project, Zabbix in our case, and it is very beneficial to track some changes between the versions that we release. Like if we talk about some sort of the software performance of our software, and let's say how many users it is capable to work with how many users before some issues start to appear. So if we have this data for multiple years, then of course it's easier to track down together with the versioning. So, okay, we had like this index of performance or whatever, and then we made this patch to our services to some functionality, which in theory optimized this and that. And as a result, in our graphs, we see that this was actually very beneficial. And now we can do like 10% more than we could before. This data and these changes help us to actually value and understand on how beneficial, or maybe quite opposite, maybe we made some change which made things worse. And again, on a high level, it's pretty simple. The more data we have, and the more we are able to understand like how to actually utilize it and what it can give to us, it's better for us. So again, to be honest, reasons and benefits doesn't differ too much from on-premise installation, maybe some data center or whatever, just a bunch of computers running in your office, or in the cloud. So there's no difference. If we would talk about the on-premise, we are basically interested in the same things, at least that would be normally for us to do. But if we're talking about the differences from, in our case, from a monitoring perspective, like how can we actually collect the data? It actually differs pretty much. Like whenever we have a physical device, it is straightforward. We just hook it up with some cable, if it's with a network or whatever else. And we know what types of monitoring this device supports. So if it's some sort of network device, Cisco, whatever, then we're talking about a SNMP. We create a SNMP items, and it's absolutely straightforward. Like we can be sure about security. We know where the one end of the cable is and where is the second one of the endpoint that we're monitoring. With the cloud, it's like a lot of ifs and different questions. First of all, like what cloud provider do we use? Like in this case, will it be Azure, again, GCP or AWS? Each of them is a cloud. Each of them is quite popular cloud, but again, you cannot take a single solution and apply to all of them, even if like the concept is more or less the same. Where it is located in on-premise case, everything could be in our office. Cloud means that it is an internet, and we must have this access to the internet, which means that again we need to think carefully about security, unless if we're doing this one other way, which would basically be touched in the last slides of my presentation. How to access the data, because okay, we might not be able to use our like SNMP or DBC. The data is in the cloud. We can access the cloud, but we cannot get the data directly from the resource itself that we're running. Changes, security, and much more. So we cannot take the same approach that we use for the on-premise setups and apply it to the cloud. Honestly saying, like cloud monitoring was here for quite a lot of time, at least starting with the Zabbix 3.0. At least that's when I found out about the existence of the cloud monitoring. And Zabbix has quite a lot of things that are available and were available for multiple years. The sad thing is all of them, well, it's not a sad thing, of course, like thanks to community who actually made it possible for the Zabbix to monitor the clouds and all the different things way back then. But of course, it brings also some challenges, complexities to set up it and live with that environment. So there is no official support, which means quite a lot of risk, especially if we talk about some enterprise setups. We just download something from the GitHub, which in this particular case with the clouds, of course, was reliable source. It was not like unknown someone created something. We just found a link in a forum and try it out in our production setup. It was powerful solutions used by many Zabbix users with quite a lot of good feedback, but still, of course, it's not the same as a solution provided by the same vendor, the product which you are using. Third-party dependencies. So all of those solutions, of course, were not a native functionality of the Zabbix. Those were a bunch of scripts in different languages, which of course comes up with the dependencies. And at the time of the setup of this solution, it probably will not bring too many issues. Like, let's say again, back then you'd probably be using like CentOS 7 or RHEL 7, something like that. And there would be most likely some instructions on what do you actually need to install, what dependencies do you need. But whenever the time goes and you decide like, okay, the CentOS 7 is not relevant anymore, it's not good for some reasons, and you decide to upgrade, and then you see that half of your dependencies are not even available anymore in your repositories and things like that, which of course takes like a lot of the time, a lot of the knowledge, and trying to figure out like how can I get this integration, third-party integration, work again with the Zabbix. So this is the time when the actual native Zabbix Cloud Monitoring is available out of the box. As usual, it is with a Zabbix with no cost, for free, open source. You can check all the code and sources and scripts, how we are actually collecting this data, how we're utilizing it, and what we're doing with that. In essence, cloud monitoring was released in the Zabbix 6.2 with initial support of AWS and Azure cloud providers. Everybody know and everybody understood like how important is this cloud monitoring and how beneficial it would be for our users. And since the Zabbix 6.2 is the latest release, but it is not an LTS release, so a decision was made to backport cloud monitoring in the Zabbix 6.0 LTS, which is the current LTS version. And if we talk about the Zabbix 6.2 after release of Zabbix 6.4 in, let's say soon, then the Zabbix 6.2 will not be supported anymore, but Zabbix 6.0 is here for stay for quite a long time. Backporting basically required to add and change some of the features and existing functionality in the Zabbix 6.0 to be able to work with the same mechanisms and data that we collect from the clouds, to be able to process them inside the Zabbix, and you would be able to see them as a graphs, charts, latest data, and process them with the triggers. Developed and supported by the Zabbix. So this is some sort of the safety for you. So we'll most likely not going to run away and abandon this. So you can expect that this cloud monitoring thing, we can call it even sort of a project, will continue to grow. And the growth means that more cloud providers and a growing list of the supported resources. Like right now, I may be talking about, okay, we're monitoring clouds, Azure and AWS. And no, I'm not gonna lie, it's not like we're able to collect and monitor all available resources in these cloud providers right now. There is limited list. In AWS, as example, we are monitoring EC2 instances as 3 buckets, and one another, which I right now forgot. But this list is definitely growing. And this probably is the case when we would also want to see some feedback from the community and actual users of the Zabbix. Unfortunately, we're not able to add like all resources you can find in the cloud in one single, let's say, minor version. So there will be a list of some priorities and which direction should we go. So receiving some feedbacks on like which resources or which cloud providers are very important for you. And if there will be a majority who are asking and requesting something specific, that's some sort of guarantee that our focus will be actually in that direction. You're a few minutes away from your first cloud metrics in Zabbix. So not going like too technical and not showing the actual screenshots. What button do you need to create? What do you need to write here and there? You need to create a user, let's call him like that, in your cloud provider, which will be basically used for the Zabbix cloud monitoring authentication with the API endpoint of your cloud provider. So there's no like username and password thing. It's a key, secret, in a region, which is probably also important to mention. Like, it's not that you take one host, one template, apply it, and monitor all of your AWS instances, as example. If you have multiple regions, if you have multiple tenants and accounts, you will have to create like setup of monitoring the hosts in a template for each of them. But it's not the worst that could happen. Like, there's not usually that much of them. So when we have a host, we just link a template, and you're already familiar with the templates. There are a lot of user macros, and also for this cloud monitoring, I'm going to be speaking mostly of AWS because that's what I've tested myself out. There's going to be a lot of user macros that you can fill in with the data to adjust how your monitoring works. But for it to actually work, you need to provide this key, secret, and region. Those are just three things that you need to start monitoring your cloud with everything that we have. And yeah, how to create this user, that's the question and a thing to do in your cloud provider, AWS or Azure. You can just Google out their documentation. I think we also even have the links on how you can do that in the cloud, in our documentation on how to install this monitoring. So after that, you basically just lay back and let the Zabbix work, do the magic. And yeah, so even easiest tasks sometimes require the guidance. I can tell from my experience as well. Things may seem easy, but sometimes you get just stubborn and stuck on one simple thing and you need a guidance. So guidance is there. And Zabbix.com integrations, where, by the way, you can find quite a lot of things integrated with the Zabbix. Some of them are official, some of them are made thanks to our community. And same applies for these cloud monitoring templates, AWS and Azure, a list of things which you need to do, how you can do that with the links to documentation of clouds in this case, like how to create this user, which user parameter do we need to populate, and how this template actually works, what API are we using, what this API method actually does. So you should be fully aware of everything that is happening in the background for the magic to happen. So under the hood, like a bit more in the technical direction, the data gathering is done through the cloud provider API. So there's no magic like I know SNMP or DBC where Zabbix agent installed in the AWS data center. There's just an API endpoint, which is being queried by the Zabbix server or the proxy, if you have them, to collect requested data. And the very important thing in cloud monitoring would be the automated discovery of the resources. When I'm basically talking about the low-level discovery, to keep a track of everything that is changing, which means that every time when somebody adds 20 new virtual machines, EC2 instances, you don't need to get back to your Zabbix and add 20 hosts. Zabbix continues to query API, scan for the changes, and whenever some new virtual machine is added or deleted, these changes also automatically apply to your Zabbix installation and the monitoring. Granular filtering options for discovery. We are basically pointing the Zabbix to our cloud and saying, collect everything you can find. But pretty often we may have some, I don't know, dev instances, some testing, some just mess and trash, which is not cleaned in the cloud yet, but we don't see any point for us to actually monitor it. You have quite a lot of abilities to use the filtering options in the Zabbix and say that, okay, I want to collect everything, but for instance with this name, or maybe this region or tier or whatever that we're collecting. I don't want to start to monitor them. I just want to ignore them and collect everything else. Or maybe you just want to filter something specific, which has like tags, production, whatever. Then I want to create these hosts and start monitoring. If not, just ignore. Out of the box triggers for generic alerts. And this is like not a new thing and very essential. With all the Zabbix official templates, you have not only the items which will collect quite a lot of the data from your endpoints, but also the generic triggers, which will notify you when something will go wrong, which doesn't mean that you need to actually settle down on the amount of the triggers and the triggers that we have in official template. You can, and you even should, like, first of all, review them and make sure that the thresholds actually match your situation. Maybe you want to be informed like sooner or later than we think you might do. And you could also create your own triggers. You can use the triggers from some other hosts. Like if this resource from the cloud has this metric lower than something, and some other host like our web page, which we might be serving to our customers, is not running, only then it could be a problem. So you have all the resources and instruments to extend the functionality, and on top of the official template, customize your cloud monitoring. So I said that there's no magic agent in the AWS data center. So how this is actually done? Using the script item type on the low-level discovery rule, which is the one item type responsible to collect to the cloud vendor, collect requested data, using the pre-processing, transform it to the Zabbix format. In this case, it will be into low-level discovery format, because again, we want the cloud monitoring to be as much self-sustainable and automated as possible. So all the changes are tracked and applied to the monitoring system on the fly without any interference from the monitoring engineers. And it's also important to understand, like, the Zabbix is a huge tool with a huge amount of the instruments and resources. And like this script item type, it's not like it was made only to monitor clouds or only AWS or Azure. It is a tool which allows you to connect to any API endpoints or whatever else you might want to monitor, gather some sort of data using the pre-processing tools, transform it so you're able to use it within the Zabbix, collect it, use it in the graphs, reports, dashboards, build the triggers on top of that, and be informed about what is happening in your environment. Low-level discovery also has a huge part in the process. Again, I'll beat myself like for the third time for the automated setup when we keep track. So let's say first time we set up the template, we connected to our cloud, we pulled in that we have 100 EC2 instances. Good. We automatically, the low-level discovery automatically creates a host for each EC2 instance that we have. Then automatically this host is linked with a template, which also comes like from the box of cloud monitoring, but this template is to discover, as example, the file systems on our EC2 instances. So new host created representing one single EC2 instance, template is linked automatically, which is discovering the file systems. File systems discovered automatically create an items in this host, triggers, and the monitoring begins. Like we already are able to go to the latest data, see the graphs, see the charts, the raw data, like how busy our disks are and things like that. And let's say after a year, somebody deleted that EC2 instance. After the next scan, either you can configure Zabbix to delete the host virtual machine from the monitoring setup right away, or you can just, of course, inform that, hey, this host is not discovered anymore and it will be deleted after X amount of the day that you specified in the low-level discovery rule. If you want to do some more, see some more technical things, how you can monitor AWS in this case, this is what I tested myself a few months ago. So I remember there was one problem with the resources in AWS, the ones that did not have tags. There were some issues, but I think right now that problem is already solved. So yeah, you can scan just QR code. It's nothing fishy. Just goes to the YouTube. I think it's like 10, 12 maybe minutes of starting with, hey, let's download this template, and ending with, oh, cool, we're getting this data from our AWS, in example with the EC2. And talking about the clouds, I couldn't miss that it is also possible to run the Zabbix in the clouds. Like, it's not necessarily that you are monitoring your AWS and have a Zabbix server instance running under your table as a physical machine. Of course, you can create a virtual machine in EC2 instance in your AWS and spin up the Zabbix instance on it. But you can also go to the marketplace of mentioned in the slide cloud providers and just spin up the Zabbix instance up in a few minutes. So you won't have to do actually the installation and configuration steps. Everything will be up and running. And then, so yeah, it probably will take like 10 minutes to start your Zabbix from the scratch, and additional 10 minutes to start monitoring your AWS or GCP cloud provider. And I emphasize like multiple times AWS and GCP. I know that there's more, and I know that there's much more resources that everybody would want to see. And we'll again remind that the work is in progress. It's not like we added cloud monitoring, this is what it is, done, closed. No, we're looking for a feedback. What do you want? What resources? Do we go in like the container direction? Maybe you want some databases, maybe something else. And of course, we'll listen and focus in that direction. So that's about it, probably from me for today for this talk. And yeah, if you have any questions, I'll gladly try to answer them.
Thank you, Dmitry. We do have a couple. I think those will be quick answers. First off, either you or me can cover this. Speaking of supported AWS services, is there a way to currently monitor AWS Elastic Container Service Cluster, ECS? Currently, from my side, I don't think we have templates for it. But
as I said, like, I know that right now we can do EC2,
RDS
3,
and
RDS. Yes, then no, we cannot yet. So
I mean, you can by modifying the, by creating your own.
Yeah, like, and that's also an important thing. I was emphasizing multiple times that we will work to add more, but it's not like we would be the only guys who are capable to do that. As I said, we're just using the script item to pull in API, request something. If you have some JavaScript knowledge and understanding of how the API works, you can do another query to the AWS and request this information. Look at an example of how we transform this data to low-level discovery output, and basically everything else should be more or less the same. So it's not really like super complicated thing to do.
Thank you. Next up, once again, question to either of us. Any plans for Hetzner Cloud native support? Feature request section is there for it. We don't necessarily disclose like what are we working on like next or what's going to be released soon, but feature request section is something that our integration team really does look at. And once we're done, I'm going to try and endorse you guys to create feature requests for cloud services that you wish to get monitored next. That's something that we are looking at. We want to have our community feedback. Which services do you guys want to see introduced? Cloud services in Zabbix templates. So that's that. Same goes for GCP and OCI. When can we expect those? I have no information about it, Dmitry. I don't think that you have any, right?
I don't want to give like any estimates about the versions or whatever. But yeah, the time will come most likely. And also touching the previous question, for us, definitely the first thing to look at is the most popular providers, and it's not only about like cloud monitoring, about everything else. Most likely the first things and features that will come will be the ones where we have majority of users who want that. And after we have that, we can focus on some more smaller niches of what people are asking.
Yeah, that's all. Thank you, Dmitry. Feel free to stick around. If you see any questions in the Q&A, feel free to help us out. And we will move on.